Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about a very important question that a lot of people don't seem to think about until it's too late, and that is how much money do you need to retire? In this video, I'm going to explain a few different ways of looking at this question, and by the end of this, I'll give you a basic equation that you can use to calculate exactly where you're at and how much you should be saving over time. Hey, what's up guys? My name is Caleb and welcome back to my channel. Now, if you haven't started putting money aside and the idea of retirement is stressing you out, this is either because you don't know where to start or you've realized that the longer you wait to start, the more money you'll have to save in a shorter period of time. Now, the first thing to understand about saving and investing for retirement is the value of time spent in the market. So time spent in the market beats timing the market in the overwhelming majority of situations. So if you are investing consistently over a very long period of time, you never have to time anything, and you honestly don't even need to care about the price of the investment itself if you choose the right funds and build a strong portfolio. So let me show you guys exactly what I'm talking about right here. So basically what this is showing is the average return of the S&P 500 over these different time frames. So as you can see here, if you're only investing in a 1-year period, the greatest return and greatest loss that we've seen in the S&P 500 is 54% and 43.3%. But as you can see here, if you move over to the 20-year period on the far right, there has never been a loss in a 20-year period, and the average is actually right around that 7% because it's halfway between the 3 and the 17. As you can see by this graph, it's like the longer you invest and the longer you hold in your portfolio, the greater chances you have at walking away with some money in the end. So like I said, over a 20-year holding period, there has never been a negative result between 1926 and 2011. And then this graph down here is another great way to look at it. So this is why you don't really time the market, because you can miss out on really good trading days. So for example, in the S&P 500, between 1996 and 2011, there was a 7.8% return, whereas if you were to take away just the top 10 trading days, you would only walk away with about half that. And then if you miss the top 20 or 30 days, you would barely make anything. We're looking at 1.7%, and you actually end up with a loss if you miss the 30 days. So in that 15-year period, you know, there's like a couple thousand days. So if you only miss 30 of them, you're walking away with less money. So that's an example of why time spent in the market is so crucial. And now the other thing I wanted to show you guys here is if you look at this graph by Charles Schwab, it says that the S&P 500 index in the last 10 years had its worst and its best performing quarter, like all in a 6-month period. So as you can see here, the biggest loss was 19% and the biggest gain was 20%, and those both happened in a 6-month period out of the 10-year span. And the next thing I wanted to move on to here is what happens to a dollar the longer you invest it. So say over a 5, 10, 20, and 40-year period with a 7% return, after about 5 years, you end up with $1.40, as you can see right here. Now, you almost double your money after 10 years. After 20 years, you've almost quadrupled your money, so 3.87. And if you wait till 40 years, you end up with a whopping $15. So if you put in $1 right now into the S&P 500 and it just sits there for 40 years, you'll end up having almost $15 at the end. So this is a perfect example of why it's so important to have longevity with your investments and to just hold them strong. Now here's a more realistic example of what you might be seeing. So say for example, you start with no money and every year you contribute $6,000 because you are maxing out your Roth IRA. Compounding for the same amount of time, let's just hit calculate. Now check this out. So if you go all the way down to 40 years, you would only be putting in $240,000 over that time span, but you'd be walking away with almost $1.3 million. So you've basically 5x'd your money just by holding it longer. And if you were to start your retirement savings just 10 years earlier, you would end up with like basically half that amount, like less than half that amount. So just that extra 10 years and starting a few years early has a huge impact on your returns because it really gives time for that compound interest to start taking effect. Hopefully now you can see the importance of starting as early as possible and how the value of your dollar is much higher at the beginning and slowly decreases as you inch closer to your retirement age. So now that you're all fired up and motivated, let's talk about mindset and what saving for retirement really is on a fundamental level. So when you save for retirement, what you're really doing is just making sure you have enough money to live your best life when you're no longer able to work. So you're taking the money needed every year during retirement and using your pre-retirement working years to build up a golden goose, so to speak, that will grow and grow over time And the goal is to get this goose to lay fat golden eggs for you every year when you're too old to work. And these golden eggs basically represent the salary that you live off in retirement. So now the question is, when can you start harvesting these shiny golden eggs? So to figure this one out, we need to work backwards. So picture yourself living the ideal retirement at the age of 60. You have the money to travel, you have your dream car, you live in your dream house, you have, you can spoil your grandkids, you have good health, you can eat really well. Picture yourself having enough money to not stress about your expenses ever again, and ask yourself, how much is this number? So without balling out on designer brands, exotic cars, and a yacht with a helipad, let's pretend the ideal amount to live comfortably is about $5,000 per month, which would be about $60,000 per year. To tie this into the golden goose metaphor, you need these yearly eggs to be $60,000 in size, where you can literally withdraw $60,000 every year from your investments, and by the time the next egg is laid the following year, the remaining amount of your investments grows another $60,000 again. But this is just a perfect situation example from the markets performing, perfectly and fantastic every single year, and we only break even. So we need to keep things a little more realistic. So let's make it our goal to withdraw $60,000 per year, but the remaining investments grows more than just $60,000 per year, just in case the market performs crappy for a couple years. If the market typically grows by 7% after inflation every year, let's prepare for only withdrawing 5% per year just to be safe. So 5% is the return that we need at the bare minimum. That means that you need to grow your goose to be so fat that 5% of it equals $60,000. So to calculate the size this goose needs to be to lay these eggs every single year, let's multiply $60,000 by 20, and that equals 1.2 million. And this is how much we need to have by age 60 if we want that $60,000 per year salary. So with 1.2 million, this means that we will have about $84,000 in growth, but we only need $60,000 of that to take out every year. So your goose can continue to grow with that extra money that's still in there, even though you're taking money out. Now, do you guys remember what I said at the beginning about what age you should start saving? Well, imagine you're 20 years old. You have 40 years to save this much money. And if you're 40 years old and you start, you only have 20 years, which means that you need to save the same amount of money in half the time. So if you do the math here, this shows that you need to save $30,000 per year for 40 years straight to achieve this number. But wait guys, before you leave the video and say, oh my god, Caleb, where are we going to get this money? We haven't even taken into account how much your money grows during that 40-year period. So let's try maxing out our Roth IRA at $6,000 per year and see where this gets us. So here we are back at that calculator that I showed earlier, maxing out our Roth IRA at $6,000 per year. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, look at this. We have $1.2 million and we have some room to spare. And right next to that, as you can see, after 40 years, you've only put in $240,000 of that money. And our yearly contributions of $6,000 is only 1/5 of the $30,000 per year we calculated just a minute ago. So this is great news. This means that with only $500 a month for 40 years, you can comfortably retire with a $60,000 a year salary and still have room for growth. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we can finally form an equation that works for any number. So here we go. We got your retirement salary multiplied by 20, divided by 5, divided by 40 years. Or if you want to simplify all those extra numbers, you basically get your retirement salary multiplied by 0.1 to figure out how much money per year you need to be investing. Now let's double check this, but with a much bigger number now. So say you want to have 100 grand per year in retirement. So we'll multiply this by 20 years, which would be $2 million, which is the grand total we need. Divide this by 5 to get the amount we must put in over the 40-year period, which comes out to $400,000. So let's just go back over to this calculator here. So I put the annual contribution in as $10,000, so that's what you're putting in every single year. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom here on the 40-year part of it, you end up with just over $2 million. So the equation worked. And just like the earlier example of growing $84,000 per year, but only taking out 60 grand, now we're having $140,000 roughly in growth, but we only need $100,000 of that per year. So this is fantastic. We're having an extra 40% more than we need every year. And that's exactly the same as it was earlier with the 60 and the 84,000. Now here is a couple of pro tips to know. So number one, don't shoot the golden goose. You need to let this grow and you need to contribute to this consistently. The earlier you start, the more time your money has to grow. And if you stop adding to this or even take some out early, you are shooting yourself in the foot and you're shooting your goose too. So the second thing here is it's important to have your cash in the right spot. In this example, I used a Roth IRA because it's tax advantaged, which means that you don't pay any taxes on the gains if you wait to withdraw until after the age of 59 and a half. And number 3 here is whatever you're investing in, it must outpace inflation. So inflation is typically around 2%, which means if you want to withdraw 5% of your money in retirement every year, you need to find or create a portfolio that gains at least 7% per year just to break even. So ideally something between 8 and 10% on average before inflation is best. Now as soon as you turn 18, I recommend getting a Roth account set up as soon as you can. That way you can lock this in. Now it's important to say that I can't guarantee these results because I ain't no financial advisor, but the chances of this working out according to the math is pretty dang high if you diversify into the right things. And just like I mentioned in the beginning, the S&P 500 has never had a negative return over a 20-year period. So the S&P 500 is probably the closest you can get to this, and it's also a very hands-off approach, especially if you use something like Acorns, which is what I do. I hope this helps you guys get a better idea of where you're at on your path to retirement, and if you found value in today's video, please drop a fat like down below, and if you want to see more weekly content just like this, please hit that subscribe button down below as well with the little notification bell next to it. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.